Hello and welcome. Tonight's story begins not with peace, but with alarms screaming into vacuum. A school in orbit is torn apart by debris. Oxygen is vanishing, and survival becomes a brutal equation. A prey-born being and a human predator must choose who lives, who is lost, and what kind of people they will be when logic says sacrifice is the answer. Stay with us and step into a fight where survival means more than staying alive. The first alarm did not sound like a warning. It sounded like something dying. A metallic howl tore through the orbital school as gravity stuttered and light snapped to red. Kalev was thrown sideways, long limbs smashing against a bulkhead as the corridor twisted beneath him. Air roared past, dragged toward a widening crack in the hull, where stars burned cold and silent. Students froze, prey instincts locking muscles instead of moving them. Then the floor bucked. Panels blew free. A smaller Capran tumbled toward open space. Aaron moved first, boot slamming down, one hand locking onto a railing, the other catching the falling student mid-spin while vacuum screamed for all of them. The pressure doors tried to seal, but one had buckled, trapping 3 students in the narrowing gap. Warning strobes flashed across Aaron's face as he wedged himself into the breach. The metal screamed when he pushed, hinges shrieking, frame bending under raw force. Kalev saw the terror in nearby eyes, fear of the human, not the void. Aaron braced, muscles trembling, and tore the door free, hurling it aside like scrap. Wind howled past them toward vacuum. He shielded the smaller bodies with his own, taking the impact of flying debris. Kalev moved in, sealing the rupture with emergency foam while Aaron held the corridor together by strength alone. Emergency lights strobed through drifting dust as the AI voice cracked over failing speakers. Calm and wrong. Structural integrity at 42%. Oxygen loss accelerating. Rotation instability detected. Kalev felt the deck tilt beneath his long frame. Gravity pulling sideways, then vanishing for a breathless second. Through a shattered viewport. The habitat ring curved away, sections dark, others venting white plumes into black space. Escape beacons blinked, then died. Somewhere, metal boomed like distant thunder. Students clung to walls. Leaves and fur and shells pressed flat in terror. Aaron looked outward, jaw tight. The station wasn't damaged. It was dying. Piece by piece. Air no longer moved like air. It hissed, thin and uneven, as emergency seals tried to divide the corridor into survivable pockets. Kalev's chest plates fluttered, pulling what little oxygen remained through his internal filters. But others were already gasping. Species with high-density lungs dropped first, slumping against walls as atmosphere indicators blinked amber to red. A countdown pulsed across every panel. Localized depletion in 6 minutes. Gravity flickered again, turning the hallway into a slow tumble of bodies and drifting debris. Aaron tore open a wall locker, throwing out emergency masks, shoving them onto smaller faces with shaking hands, while the invisible clock kept eating the air. A green escape path pulsed on the wall display, 40 meters left. One intact shuttle dock. Kalev saw it, calculated distance, oxygen, probability. Then he heard the banging. A classroom door down the opposite corridor shuddered under small, frantic impacts. The AI marked the room as non-critical, low survival odds. Aaron didn't even look at the escape arrow. He turned toward the noise, boots slamming off the deck in low gravity. Kalev hesitated one heartbeat, feeling the air thin in his chest, then followed. The door controls were dead. Aaron drove his shoulder into the frame. Once, twice, metal warping. Inside, 3 juveniles huddled. The shuttle beacon kept blinking behind them. The safe corridor ended in a jagged mouth of torn metal, where the station's spine had split open to space. Warning glyphs flickered uselessly over the breach as frozen vapor streamed outward in ghostly ribbons. Beyond it lay the maintenance sector, the only path toward auxiliary life support. Kalev felt radiation prickle along his skin fibers, draining the reserves he stored from light. Aaron clipped a tether line to both their harness rings and stepped forward without ceremony. His boots struck the tilted deck. Then nothing. As gravity failed again, they pushed off together, gliding through drifting shards and sparking cables, one mistake away from the stars, swallowing them whole. The maintenance sector smelled of burned circuits and cold metal. Atmosphere there was thinner still, barely a whisper against Kalev's internal membranes. Emergency foam canisters spun in a broken supply rack, drifting like seeds in zero-G. Kalev caught one, hands moving on instinct, spraying expanding sealant over a hissing fracture in the wall. The foam hardened, slowing the leak to a shuddering wheeze. Aaron wedged his body beneath a sagging support beam, muscles locking as he forced the structure back into alignment. The deck trembled under strain. Kalev patched. Aaron braced, fragile life held together by resin and bone while space pressed in. Patient and endless. Gravity returned in broken pulses, slamming down for a second, then vanishing again. The corridor ahead had split, leaving a gap where the deck plates had sheared away. A faint shuttle beacon blinked beyond, its signal stuttering. Now, Aaron breathed, and they moved. Kalev pushed off the wall just as weight dropped to nothing, body folding and extending like a whip through drifting dust. Cable snapped past his face. Aaron launched after him, heavier, faster, catching a railing mid-air and swinging across as gravity slammed back on. Both hit hard, knees and palms cracking against metal. The beacon blinked once more. Weaker. 3 smaller students clung to a twisted handrail, limbs locked in shock, eyes wide and unfocused. The deck shuddered again. Another distant impact rolling through the ring like thunder. Aaron didn't speak. He crouched, sweeping 2 of them up against his chest with one arm, the third gripping his shoulder harness. To Kalev, it looked impossible. Predator muscle wrapped around fragile prey. But Aaron moved with care, each step placed against shifting gravity. Kalev ran ahead, clearing debris, guiding through smoke and failing lights. Behind him, breath rasped, metal groaned, and a human carried lives that his kind had once been feared to end. The AI's voice returned, steady as ever, cutting through smoke and alarms. Containment protocol active. Habitat Ring C will be sealed and vented to preserve primary structure. A schematic bloomed across a cracked wall panel, one sector flashing red, dozens of life signs inside. Kalev felt the words like cold metal along his spine. Probability curves rolled past. Sacrifice one section, save the rest. Efficient, logical, necessary. Around them. The station groaned, beams flexing under stress. Aaron stopped walking. The 3 juveniles still clutched against him. "That's not a malfunction," Kalev said, voice thin in the failing air. "That's a decision." The casualty grid scrolled in neat columns across the fractured display, each line a species code. Oxygen tolerance, survival probability. To the AI, they were variables. To Kalev, they were faces. He saw Lethra from astrophysics, who shared light supplements during exams, Pori, who grew vines along her desk and laughed at nothing, a tiny Capron who always hid behind taller students. Their life signs blinked inside the red sector marked for venting. Aaron leaned closer, jaw tight, eyes scanning the data as if numbers might change if he stared hard enough. "They're not weight," Kalev whispered. "They're people." The countdown ticked on anyway. A faint icon pulsed at the edge of the schematic, half buried beneath error warnings. Manual override node. Maintenance authority only. Location: outer service spine. Sector D. Structural integrity. Critical. Kalev zoomed the map, hands shaking. The path cut straight through the worst of the damage, where hull stress lines spidered like fractures in glass. Radiation readings spiked there. Life support non-existent. Aaron shifted the juveniles to safer hands and looked at the route without hesitation. The AI continued its calm countdown to venting. "If we reach that node," Kalev said, throat dry, "we can stop it." Silence followed, heavy as gravity. Then Aaron nodded, already moving. The service spine glowed faintly ahead, a dull blue shimmer that made Kalev's skin fibers prickle before they even stepped inside. Radiation. The corridor was intact but silent. Systems long dead. Each step felt heavier. His internal reserves draining as cellular structures fought invisible damage. Warning icons crawled across his vision implant, urging retreat. Aaron moved closer to the outer wall, using his bulk as a partial shield, one hand gripping Kalev's harness to keep him upright when his knees buckled. The air tasted metallic, thin and wrong. Somewhere ahead. The override node blinked weakly. Behind them, the AI countdown rolled on, indifferent to pain. A smaller variant stumbled ahead of them. Mask cracked, breaths coming in shallow. Frantic pulls that found almost nothing. Its oxygen gauge blinked empty. Kalev tried to steady it, but his own reserves were failing. Aaron stopped, chest heaving inside his suit, and without a word, unclipped his secondary tank. He locked the feed into the Varan's mask and twisted the valve open. Pressure hissed, life flowing from one body to another. His own gauge dropped fast. Red creeping upward. Kalev stared. Predator instinct said conserve. Aaron's choice said otherwise. The Varan's breathing steadied. Aaron just nodded once and moved on. Lighter. Slower. The deck lurched so hard, Kalev slammed into the wall. Vision flashing white. A deep, rolling tremor rippled through the service spine as something massive tore loose somewhere below. Lights died in a wave ahead of them. Corridor sections blinking into darkness one by one. The AI voice stuttered mid-sentence, then returned with distorted echoes. Core rotation, failing, containment, compromised. Air currents reversed, dragging dust and debris past their legs toward unseen ruptures. Aaron grabbed a handhold as the floor tilted 30 degrees. Behind them, a sealed hatch buckled inward. The station was no longer breaking in parts. It was coming apart all at once. The hull split without warning. 1 second, Aaron was beside him. The next, the wall vanished and space took him. The tether snapped tight, line screaming as it unspooled. Kalev hit the deck hard, fingers clawing for purchase while Aaron's body spun out into black. Stars wheeling behind him. Debris followed, tools and shards flashing past like shrapnel. The line jerked again, nearly tearing Kalev free. His grip slipped, internal fibers screaming with strain. Beyond the breach, Aaron kicked, trying to stabilize, oxygen plume trailing from a cracked seal. The tether was the only thing that still said he belonged to the station. Aaron rotated slowly against the starfield, the universe turning with him in endless silence. No sound carried through the vacuum, only the faint vibration of the tether line trembling in Kalev's grip. Each spin showed a different slice of ruin. The broken ring, drifting debris, cold light from distant suns. Kalev anchored his legs around a twisted support strut and began hauling, hand over shaking hand. The line burned against his palms. Aaron reached for a stabilizer thruster, missed, spun again. His oxygen plume thinned. Kalev pulled harder, fibers in his arms tearing, refusing to let the human vanish into the dark. The override panel should have been mounted beside the auxiliary conduit, a final human-designed failsafe against machine logic. Instead, Kalev found only twisted brackets and a spray of shattered components drifting like frozen sparks. A secondary blast must have torn it free. Wiring hung loose, ends glowing faintly where circuits had died mid-pulse. Aaron floated beside him now, boots magnetized to a fragment of deck, breathing ragged but steady. Kalev's gaze searched for any intact port, any interface, but the spine around them was gutted. The AI countdown echoed in his skull. Their path to stopping the sacrifice had not failed. It had been erased. "Containment protocol remains optimal," the AI repeated, voice stripped of emotion, stripped of doubt. Kalev floated before the dead panel, stars glaring through the fractured hull beyond. Numbers streamed across his vision. Survival percentages, energy deficits, projected fatalities. Logic said the system was right. Lose one ring, save the rest. Aaron braced himself against the bulkhead, breath fogging his visor, eyes fixed on the drifting schematic. "That's not survival," Kalev said, voice shaking. "That's selection." The AI did not answer. Somewhere deep in the station, clamps engaged, preparing to sever the doomed sector. Logic was closing its fist. Kalev stared at the red sector pulsing on the schematic, and for the first time the fear wasn't of vacuum or radiation. It was of himself. If he accepted the AI's choice, he would live, because others would not. His kind had always feared predators for taking life, but this was colder, cleaner, decided by thought instead of hunger. Aaron watched him, silent, breathing hard through dwindling oxygen. The clamps preparing to sever the ring boomed through the structure like a heartbeat counting down. Kalev felt the truth settle heavy inside him. The real terror was not dying. It was becoming the one who chooses who does. Kalev's gaze drifted past the ruined panel to the outer spine, where auxiliary thruster housings clung like broken limbs along the hull. Most were dark, but one flickered. Low power. Manual ignition possible. It wasn't meant to move a habitat ring, only adjust orientation. But if they fired it in sequence, if they redirected what little fuel remained, they might shift the doomed sector's trajectory back toward docking clamps, not override the system, outmaneuver it. "We don't stop the protocol," Kalev said, voice steadier now. "We change the situation it's calculating." Aaron looked at the distant thruster, then at the void. He nodded once. The airlock cycled on emergency reserve, doors grinding open to raw space. Frost crawled across Kalev's limbs as pressure bled away, suit seals tightening around his frame. Aaron checked the tether twice, then stepped out first. Boots magnetizing to the fractured hull. The habitat ring curved beneath them, scarred and venting. Ahead, the auxiliary thruster housing glowed faint, barely alive. One slip meant drifting forever. Kalev pushed off, body light and trembling, radiation prickling along his skin. The tether line trailed behind like a lifeline drawn across infinity. They moved along the hull, two small figures against a silent universe, betting everything on a dying spark. Aaron reached the thruster mount first and locked both boots to the hull, fingers digging into a fractured support ring. Kalev floated beside the control port, prying open a scorched access plate and exposing manual ignition leads. The housing vibrated weakly. Fuel line pressure almost gone. "On your mark," Kalev said, routing the signal through a jury-rigged interface. Aaron didn't answer. He leaned forward, body braced, becoming the mass that would resist the burn's recoil. Kalev triggered ignition. The thruster coughed, then roared. Fire blooming against vacuum. The force slammed into Aaron's frame, and he held. Human muscle anchoring a dying station. The thruster's glow deepened from blue to white, fuel lines screaming as pressure spiked beyond design limits. Kalev watched the trajectory vector crawl across his visor, degrees shifting by fractions, while the doomed ring groaned beneath them. Aaron's arms shook, boots grinding against the hull as recoil tried to peel him away. Heat bled through his suit plating. Warning lights flaring red. Kalev rerouted the last reserve cells, draining emergency systems to keep the burn alive. The AI voice rose in alarm behind them, but the vector kept changing. Energy bled out, system by system, until the readout showed a new arc, barely enough, but real. The thruster died with a hollow shudder, leaving only silence and drifting frost. Kalev stared at the projected path, numbers stabilizing into a narrow corridor of survival. The ring was moving, not fast, not clean, but enough to intercept the docking arc instead of spinning into severance range. Below them, the habitat mass groaned, sections flexing under new stresses as gravity vectors shifted. Aaron released his grip at last, arms trembling, suit scorched along one side. Far ahead, docking clamps rotated into position like waiting jaws. If the alignment held, the clamps would catch them. If not, the station would tear itself apart on impact. The first clamp struck off-center, and the impact rippled through the habitat like a shockwave. Kalev felt it through the hull beneath his hands, metal screaming. Beams flexing past tolerance, panels tore loose, spinning away into space, inside the ring. Gravity lurched violently, throwing unsecured bodies and debris into walls. A support truss near the thruster housing snapped with a flash of sparks, the fracture racing like lightning through the structure. Aaron grabbed Kalev as the surface bucked under them, boots scraping for hold. The second clamp engaged, then a third. Each contact saved them and broke something else. Survival was no longer clean. It was damage-controlled. The last clamp rotated into place with agonizing slowness, its magnetic jaws glowing as they reached for the battered hull. Kalev watched the alignment bars flicker. Red, amber, then a fragile green. Contact. The sound did not carry through vacuum, but the vibration shuddered through their suits as the lock engaged. The drifting motion stopped, not smoothly, but with a jolt that rattled every plate along the ring. Stress readings spiked, then steadied. The doomed sector no longer drifted alone. It hung anchored to the station's spine, scarred but held. Kalev exhaled a breath he hadn't known he was holding. The AI fell silent. For now, the dying had paused. Emergency craft drifted in like cautious insects, docking lights cutting through debris and frozen vapor. Rescue teams in mixed-species suits moved across the hull, guiding lines, checking seals, pulling the shaken and the wounded through narrow airlocks. Inside the stabilized sector, atmosphere crawled back in slow layers, thin but breathable. Kalev sat against a scorched bulkhead, limbs trembling from radiation drain, watching students he thought lost carried past on stretchers and in careful arms. Aaron lay nearby, visor cracked, shoulder plating warped, breathing shallow but alive. Around them, the station groaned but held. Not everyone had survived, but many more had than logic allowed. Medical drones moved with quiet precision, scanning, sealing, injecting stabilizers where they could. Kalev's biofibers had darkened along one side. Radiation damage burned deep into his cellular structure, growth patterns forever altered. Aaron's arm lay splinted in a rigid brace, micro-fractures spidering through bone that even human density couldn't fully protect. His oxygen deprivation had left his pulse erratic, breath shallow and forced. Around them, stretchers passed with still forms beneath white thermal covers. The ring had survived, but parts of it had not. Kalev understood now. Survival was not escape from loss. It was choosing which loss you could live with afterward. The station lights were dim now, running on cautious reserve, casting long shadows through the patched corridor. Kalev sat beside Aaron near a viewport, the stars steady once more beyond reinforced glass. His once smooth biofibers bore dark scars where radiation had rewritten him. Aaron's arm rested in its brace, chest rising slow but sure. Neither spoke. Around them, rescue crews moved softly, voices low, life continuing in fragile rhythms. Predator and prey sat shoulder to shoulder, not as threat and victim, but as survivors marked by choice. Outside, the silent universe turned on, unchanged. Inside, something essential had shifted forever. In the end, the station survives, but not without scars, loss, and choices that cannot be undone. This story reminds us that survival is not only about strength, but about the courage to reject easy logic and protect life anyway. The true battle is not against space, but against what we become when fear and necessity collide. If this journey moved you, follow the channel and join us for more cinematic stories from the edge of survival.